Ever spent your life savings on a boat slip, only to end up in handcuffs 3 weeks later for eating a sandwich while half the marina filmed you like it was a Netflix special? That's how my plan to rebuild turned into a front row seat to HOA absurdity. One minute I was a down but not out Navy vet trying to restart my marine repair business, and the next I was being publicly shamed by a woman who thought owning a clipboard made her queen of the Pacific. Her name was Celeste Monroe, but to me, she'll always be the reason I learned the phrase unauthorized condiment application could show up on a violation notice. If you've ever tangled with a self-declared community leader who makes rules up faster than a toddler with a crayon, this story is going to hit home. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? It all started when I bought slip B17 at a city auction, $85,000, 0 cents for a prime dock space at Baywood Landing Marina. I saw it as a lifeline. My shop had just folded after a major Navy contract dried up, and I needed something, anything, to stay in the game. Fixing boats wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. This slip gave me the perfect chance to offer repair services right from the dock, keep costs down, and maybe even sleep at night again. But it turns out, in Baywood, peace and quiet come with strings. Invisible ones, tied around your ankles, waiting to yank you underwater the moment you take a breath. The moment I arrived to inspect my new slip, that white Tesla pulled up like a shark circling a dinghy. Out stepped Celeste, dressed like a TED Talk and armed with an iPad. "I'm Celeste Monroe, Community Development Strategist," she announced, with the kind of smile you'd see before a tax audit. I introduced myself as the new owner of B17, and her whole demeanor shifted, like someone just told her the caviar was out of stock. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, tapping on her screen like it was a detonator. "Slip B17 is now part of our Commercial Development Enhancement Zone. Recreational use is no longer authorized." She tossed out buzzwords like confetti, synergy, compliance thresholds, modernization objectives, and not one of them answered the question. What gave her the right? I handed her every document I had, auction papers, city signatures, stamps galore, and she looked at them like I'd just offered her a hand-drawn treasure map. "Those sales are under internal review," she replied, casually discarding months of red tape and thousands of dollars like it was a clerical hiccup. I asked who she reported to, and she hit me with the kind of line that belongs in satire. "I liaise with strategic stakeholders to optimize community outcomes." Translation, no one knows. But she was already snapping photos of the dock like it was a crime scene. That's when Frank, the marina manager, showed up. Mid-50s, sun-worn, and built like he could bench press a propeller. He didn't say much at first, just gave Celeste a nod like he was bracing for a storm he'd seen too many times before. After she left, Frank pulled me aside and spoke in a whisper that told me this wasn't his first rodeo. "She wasn't elected, she just showed up and started acting like she owned the place," he said. "3 families have already packed up, fined into oblivion." He told me the marina used to be a real community. Now people barely made eye contact, everyone afraid they'd be next. And just like that, I knew this wasn't going to be about fixing boats anymore. I was now fighting a silent war with a paper queen who ruled with fine print and fake authority. What I didn't know was that in just 48 hours, I'd be standing in that same spot, with handcuffs on, learning the hard way that HOA nightmares aren't always fiction. Sometimes they just drive Teslas and smile while they ruin you. 2 days after meeting Celeste, I came home to find a cardboard box sitting on my porch like a passive-aggressive gift from the HOA ferry. Inside, 8 neatly stacked violation notices printed on ocean blue paper, each one folded like a wedding invitation to financial ruin. The total? $7,000, 0 cents in fines. The reasons? Let's just say they read like a menu from a fever dream. $950, 0 cents for tightening a bolt without a certified compliance technician. $1,200, 0 cents for excessive mechanical presence. And my personal favorite, $600, 0 cents for unauthorized commercial food service, also known as eating a sandwich on my deck. Apparently, the mayo counted as contraband. I stood there reading each one with growing disbelief, wondering when basic maintenance became a crime scene. Then I noticed something even more insulting. Every notice spelled my name wrong. Jake Lawston, as if they were fining some guy in a parallel universe and I was just collateral damage. Attached to the violations was a 15-page compliance assessment report, complete with photos taken from angles only a drone could capture. One shot showed me wiping down a fuel cap, another zoomed in on my lunch. Yes, my sandwich. There was even an arrow pointing to the bread like it had just robbed a bank. The caption? Unauthorized preparation of foodstuffs on commercially zoned marine property. I laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that sounds suspiciously close to a nervous breakdown. This wasn't a mistake. This was targeted nonsense dressed in bureaucratic costume jewelry. Celeste and her crew weren't just enforcing rules. They were inventing them faster than I could violate them. Every line of the report referenced obscure subsections of documents that either didn't exist or hadn't been made public. One cited compliance with subsection 42.7 of the Maritime Enhancement Protocol. I spent 2 hours online trying to find that protocol. It was as real as Bigfoot's mortgage. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't incompetence. It was strategy. Celeste ran the HOA like a blender with no lid. Loud, messy, and no one asked for the smoothie. Her real talent wasn't organization or governance. It was weaponized confusion. Everything she handed out sounded official enough to scare you, but crumbled the second you applied logic. There were references to federal cleaning certifications from agencies that didn't exist, environmental standards that contradicted one another, and fines tied to behavior that wasn't even prohibited in the original HOA charter. But no one else was questioning it. Most residents were too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to fight, and honestly, I got it. When someone throws enough paper at you, eventually you stop checking for ink. That's how they win, by exhausting you into compliance. And I was one late notice away from giving in. But then I thought about what Frank had said, that 3 families had already been pushed out. People who didn't want a fight, just a place to live in peace. They sold their boats at a loss and walked away because it was easier than standing up to a smiling tyrant in loafers. That hit me hard, because I knew how it felt to lose something you built with your own hands. And I wasn't about to let someone steal my second chance because she had a better printer and a knack for sounding important. So I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, not to plead. No, I was done playing defense. I was going to question everything, every fine, every fake policy, every nonsense citation. I figured if the rules didn't exist, someone ought to say it out loud. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the meeting wasn't a meeting at all. It was a performance. A courtroom parody with no jury, no rules of order, and 4 board members who nodded like dashboard bobbleheads at every word Celeste said. And me? I was about to walk into their little theater with a stack of logic, ready to speak truth to power. But power wasn't interested in truth, it was interested in obedience. I didn't realize I wasn't just attending the meeting. I was the opening act for my own railroading, and the show was about to begin. And that's the moment I learned rules don't need to be real to ruin your life. All it takes is confidence, paperwork, and a few people too scared to ask questions. I walked into that HOA meeting thinking I'd find justice. What I found instead was a stage, a script, and a verdict written before I even opened my mouth. If you think 8 fake violations was bad, wait until you see what happens when the fines turn into character assassination and the HOA meeting turns into a setup. In the next pot, I speak up and Celeste makes sure I pay for it. Because here's the lesson. Sometimes silence keeps you safe, but speaking up is how you make it matter. Stick around. It gets uglier and a whole lot louder. I came to that HOA meeting ready to fight fair. I brought documents, logic, and the wildly naive belief that someone might actually listen. What I walked into was less of a meeting and more of a scripted sentencing. Celeste sat at the head of the long folding table like she was chairing a corporate coup. Next to her were 3 board members I'd never seen before in my life. Middle-aged, middle-tempered, and middle-brained. They nodded like bobbleheads any time she spoke and blinked like they were afraid thinking might count as rebellion. No introductions, no agenda, just a welcome to what felt like my own disciplinary hearing. The only thing missing was a guy in a robe and a bailiff with a taser. I started to explain how the citations I'd received didn't match any known code. I got 6 words out before Celeste raised a hand like she was hailing a cab. "We ask that all comments align with community cohesion objectives," she said. I wasn't even sure what language that was. I tried again, this time pointing out how subsection 42.7 didn't exist and the Marina Enhancement Protocol wasn't on any public record. Another board member cut me off to warn that I was verging into adversarial rhetoric. I held up my purchase documents, the ones signed by the city, and Celeste glanced at them like I'd handed her expired coupons. "City errors are under review," she said flatly, writing something on her iPad with the same energy you'd use while scrolling through terms and conditions. After 10 minutes of trying to inject common sense into a room vacuum-sealed against it, they voted. Unanimously, all violations upheld, no discussion, and just to drive the point home, they added a $500 0-cents resistance fee for what they called hostile engagement. Hostile? I hadn't even raised my voice. I hadn't even used sarcasm. Not real sarcasm, anyway. I stood there with my mouth halfway open when Celeste leaned back and delivered the kind of closing statement that only a villain drunk on her own press could say out loud. "This marina is moving forward, with or without you." Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. And the way she smiled, it wasn't for anyone in the room, it was for the camera she probably had hidden in the corner. The meeting adjourned, the actors filed out, and I was left staring at a stack of fines for crimes I hadn't committed and regulations no one could define. I went home and pulled an all-nighter, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I searched public records, court filings, business licenses, you name it, and guess what? Celeste Monroe wasn't registered with the county, not as a consultant, not as an HOA official, not even as a contractor. She had no legal authority. She was a fraud with a blazer and a buzzword Rolodex. Her entire power came from assumption and confidence, like a magician with PowerPoint. But instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, she pulled fines out of thin air and dared you to ask questions. Most people didn't. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt trapped. I wasn't going to pay a single dime, but I also couldn't sleep, not with my boat sitting idle while she turned the screws. That engine had been knocking for days, and every hour I left it unattended was another step closer to losing everything I had left. So at 5:45 in the morning, I made the dumbest decision of my life. I grabbed my wrench, parked outside the marina fence, and walked in the side gate like a burglar who owned the property. Technically, I did. Legally, maybe not. But morally, that slip was mine. I kept low, stayed quiet, and tiptoed to my boat like it was a hostage rescue. I crouched down and popped the engine hatch, just trying to check the coolant line. But before I even touched it, I heard the one sound that would haunt me for months. Heels on wood. Click, click, click. And I knew. I'd walked straight into a trap. If you've ever felt steamrolled by someone hiding behind fake authority and fine print, you're not alone. If this story hits close to home, send it to a friend who's dealt with the same kind of HOA madness or bureaucratic power trip. Let's not just vent, let's help each other fight smarter. And drop a comment. Tell me what you'd have done at that dock. Because the next part, it gets worse before it gets wild. By the time I crouched beside my engine with a wrench in one hand and a prayer in the other, I knew I was technically violating the restraining order. But how do you trespass on your own property? That slip was legally mine, purchased, documented, notarized. Still, Celeste had filed an emergency protection order claiming I posed a threat to the emotional safety of the marina, Apparently, raising your voice at a staged HOA tribunal made you dangerous. The footage she submitted to court had been edited within an inch of its life. No context, no interruptions. Just me, looking red-faced and aggressive, while she blinked and trembled like a community theater understudy auditioning for Victim of the Year. The judge bought it. The paperwork was signed. I was legally banned from stepping foot on marina property until a full hearing in 30 days. But I couldn't wait 30 days. The boat engine had been knocking, and if I didn't check on it, I risked losing the only thing keeping me above water, literally and financially. So, like an idiot with too much pride and not enough patience, I snuck in before dawn, hoping no one would be awake and that morality might outweigh legality, just this once. But morality never stands a chance when HOA theater meets smartphone surveillance. I hadn't even gotten the engine hatch closed when I heard the worst sound imaginable, the sharp click of high heels on dock planks. Celeste stepped out of the shadows like a villain at the climax of a bad soap opera, already holding her phone out, recording. "Officers, he's back," she said, her voice quivering just enough to hit the sweet spot between fear and performance. "I'm really scared. He's violating the restraining order again." Within 5 minutes, 2 police officers arrived, both looking like they'd rather be doing absolutely anything else. "Sir, we need to see some ID," one said, already resigned to the paperwork. I tried to explain that I owned the slip, that this was my boat, that I had documents in my glove box. But it didn't matter. The other officer sighed and said, "Court order's a court order. You'll have a chance to explain it later." Then came the cuffs. Cold, steel, efficient. I was walked off the dock in front of a half-dozen joggers, coffee drinkers, and dog walkers, most of whom pulled out phones like I was street theater. The worst part? That giant metal whale sculpture in the marina lobby stared down at me like it had been hired to judge me. I used to love that thing. Now it just felt like the mascot for my humiliation. They held me in a cell for 24 hours. No charges filed, just violation of an emergency order. It wasn't prison, but it wasn't dignity either. I had a lot of time to think about how I got here, how many signs I ignored, and how much of this mess was mine to own. I kept replaying the HOA meeting in my head, wondering if I'd been too calm, too reasonable, too slow to realize I wasn't dealing with rules. I was dealing with a con artist in business casual. Celeste hadn't won because she was clever. She'd won because everyone else assumed someone else would stop her, and now here I was drying my hands on toilet paper, wishing I'd fought smarter. HOA justice is like a cargo ship. Slow, soulless, and will crush you if you stand still too long. I was released the next morning, shoes untied, pride half-swallowed, and mood somewhere between bitter and boiling. As I walked up my driveway, there was Frank. Arms crossed, baseball cap pulled low, eyes scanning the street like he was about to commit treason. "Jake," he whispered, "meet me at the marina storage shed tonight. And don't tell anyone we talked." Then he left without another word. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. And just like that, the mood shifted. Because if Frank was whispering, that meant there were things Celeste didn't want found. And if I'd learned anything by now, it was that when fake leaders build their empires on lies, all it takes is one flashlight in the right place to bring the whole damn thing down. Stick around. What Frank had was bigger than gossip. He had receipts. If you've ever been handcuffed by a system that pretends paperwork is more important than truth, then you already know. Real justice doesn't show up with a badge, it shows up with proof. Share this story with someone who's fighting their own HOA headache, because they deserve to know they're not alone. Leave a comment if you've ever watched a bully hide behind bureaucracy. And stay tuned, because in the next part, Frank doesn't just bring gossip, he brings the receipts. And this time, we're not knocking, we're kicking the whole door in. I knew Celeste wouldn't fall for pressure or logic, so I used the only bait she couldn't resist: ego. I called her up, sounding beaten down and ready to fold. I told her I was tired, broke, and ready to sell my slip to someone who actually knows how to make the marina better. I could practically hear her grinning through the phone. She tried to act neutral, but her voice had that high-gloss shine of someone picturing herself as a visionary in a press release. "I'm glad you're seeing the big picture," she said. "Let's meet soon. Professionally, of course. We should make this a transparent process for the community." I smiled to myself. Transparent was exactly what I had in mind. The community development session was announced on every board, email thread, and bulletin. I framed it as a simple HOA update for Marina Vista residents, a harmless check-in. What I didn't mention was that I'd be live streaming it to over 600 people, and that Frank had stitched together footage, invoices, and county records into a tidy packet of truth. Celeste arrived late, wearing a blazer, sunglasses, and the confidence of a TED Talk speaker who thinks they're doing the world a favor. She walked in like she owned the building and sat down like the meeting was just another victory lap. She didn't even ask who else was attending. Arrogance makes you blind. From the jump, she was all buzzwords and bravado. "This marina has undergone rapid evolution," she began. "We're now positioned to attract elite maritime tourism partners like Pacific Coastal Tours." That name dropped like a rock into the livestream chat. Then she added, "I've negotiated exclusive commercial agreements valued at $600,000 0 cents annually, securing a 15% consultant stake in exchange for implementation oversight." Boom. She said it. On camera. The cut, the name, the deal. I just sat there nodding like I was amazed. She kept going. "We've successfully relocated 12 outmoded vessels. Slip 14A, 22C, 31B, all cleared. We're modernizing. It's progress." She called them vessels. Those were families. Then she pulled out her favorite lie. "I was unanimously elected HOA president as part of our 2023 Leadership Streamlining Initiative. Voter engagement was at an all-time high." That's when Frank gave me the signal. I laid the documents on the table. Paper copies, labeled and date-stamped. Emails between her and Pacific Tours. Financial transfers. The fake ballot list with signatures from people who'd never existed. A time-stamped video of her slipping a maintenance guy $100, 0 cents, to help expedite vote counting. Celeste froze, blinking, like a VHS tape jammed mid-frame. "These are confidential," she snapped. "Stolen, clearly." She looked at Frank, then me, then the growing crowd forming just outside the doorway. I stood up and addressed the viewers. "To anyone watching from home, you've just seen the Consultant of the Year confess to conflicts of interest, commercial kickbacks, and fabricated elections, all while illegally squatting in Slip 19B for the last 4 years. I held up her lease record, or rather, the lack of one. Frank chimed in with the audit log. "She's never paid for Slip 19B, not once. The prior owner disappeared at sea. She moved in, never notified the county, and started collecting fees from others while living here rent-free." Someone outside gasped. Celeste lunged for my phone. "End this stream now. This is slander. I will sue all of you. You're finished." But she wasn't in charge anymore. Her meltdown was happening in real time, and the livestream viewer count climbed like a thermometer in hell. Comments poured in. "She admitted it. This is wild. I knew she was shady." And Marina Karen exposed. Residents filled the room. Some filmed. Others just watched. No one said a word. I called for an emergency vote. All in favor of removing Celeste Monroe from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. A sea of hands went up. Some clapped. One guy actually whistled. Any opposed? Not a single hand. She looked around for someone to defend her and found nothing but phones and folded arms. Then came vote number 2. Motion to appoint interim president while we conduct a full audit and rollback of Celeste's enacted policies. The crowd erupted again. Frank handed me a fresh binder labeled Emergency Motions, signed. That made it official. I was now the acting president of the HOA she tried to weaponize. My first act? Cancel every outstanding fine, including the ones she invented. My second? Announce a formal audit into every financial decision made during her time in power. "This is vengeance," Celeste spat, waving her iPad like a sword. "No," I said, "this is correction." But it wasn't over. Not until the yacht left the dock. I walked down the pier with a document in hand, now notarized and stamped with the full authority she once pretended to have. She was on the deck of her 45-geater, frantically packing, face bright red and finger-pointing at anyone who dared glance her way. "You're all sheep," she shouted. "I built this marina into something valuable. You'll regret this." I handed her the paper. "You have 48 hours to vacate Slip 19B. County says it was never yours. You owe $43,000, 0 cents, in back fees, and the penalty clock just started." She crumpled it and hurled it into the water. "I'll sue all of you," she screamed. "I'll ruin every single person here." Nobody even responded. The silence said everything. The show was over. The villain had broken character, and the marina had already moved on. And that's how the queen of fake bylaws got dethroned by a live stream and a stack of receipts. The lesson: arrogance writes checks that reality eventually cashes. And when a scam runs on silence, truth with a camera is lethal. If this story made you smile, shake your head, or shout, "Finally!" send it to a friend dealing with their own HOA circus. Trust me, they'll thank you. And drop a comment below. What would you have done with that eviction notice? Because next, she doesn't disappear quietly. In next part, she brings lawyers, and I bring the internet. 3 weeks after evicting Celeste from Slip 19B with a notarized pink slip and the sound of community applause still echoing across the docks, I got served papers that nearly made me choke on my coffee. Celeste whatever, was suing me and the entire HOA for $500,000, 0 cents. Claims included defamation, harassment, business interference, and emotional distress, the kind of legal gibberish you only hear from someone who weaponizes the dictionary. Her lawyer had written it up like I'd been running a smear campaign from a basement command center. I read it 3 times and laughed so hard I scared my neighbor's cat. But the anxiety didn't take long to catch up. $500,000 is a number you don't shake off just because the lawsuit sounds stupid. I barely slept for 2 nights, staring at those documents like they might suddenly catch fire and solve the problem for me. But then, something wild happened. People showed up. Marina residents pooled together a defense fund, raised $25, 0 cents K in 72 hours. Frank's daughter launched a GoFundMe that pulled in another $15, 0 cents K from former victims at other marinas. That's when I realized this wasn't my fight anymore. It was everyone's. And that terrified Celeste more than any court. Turns out, she had a habit. A reporter from the local station caught wind of our mess and went digging. Found out Celeste Monroe used to be Celeste Harper in Santa Barbara, and before that, Celeste Riley in San Diego. 3 marinas, same con. Fake HOA elections, illegal fines, commercial conversion schemes, and a grand total of over $800,000, 0 cents siphoned off through shady deals. The news aired a full segment, drone shots, interviews with families who'd lost their boats, sound bites of her fake promises, and by the end of it, her credibility had the shelf life of warm shrimp salad. The lawsuit didn't just fall apart, it imploded. Judge threw it out with prejudice and ordered Celeste to pay all my legal fees. Not just court costs, everything. Filing fees, document prep, even the gas money I spent driving to depositions. The ruling came down like a final chapter written in bold. But the county clerk had one more surprise. As restitution for the months of harassment and financial sabotage, they transferred Slip 23B to me, the same one she'd squatted in for years. I didn't just get justice. I got the address she used to pretend was power. Fast forward 6 months, Marina Vista's clean, calm, and actually fun again. My boat repair business is booming. I've spoken at 3 town halls about HOA fraud and got invited to Sacramento to consult on new legislation. People call me the guy who evicted the HOA president. Even got a coffee mug that says it. And just when I thought the story was done, a letter showed up. Handwritten. from Arizona. Celeste was working at a used car lot and asking me to write her a character reference for community service. I posted it to the Marina group chat with one caption: "Some people never learn." The comment section exploded, and I just smiled. Some fight HOA fines. I evicted the HOA. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway of all. Sometimes the little guy wins not because he yells the loudest, but because he stands the longest. This wasn't just a story about a forged election or a stolen boat slip. It was about what happens when you stop being intimidated by a clipboard and start fighting back with truth. About how a community can outlast a con when the right people finally speak up. Because in the end, this wasn't about boats. It was about belonging, and no HOA on earth has the authority to revoke that. If this story made you laugh, shake your head, or feel a little more powerful in your own battle, share it with a friend who's dealing with the same nonsense. Help them feel less alone. Drop a comment, what lesson stuck with you, and hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story we bring to light, because trust me, there's always another Celeste. But now, there's also more of us. And hey, what HOA nightmare, power trip story, or bureaucratic circus should we dig into next? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your wildest HOA horror stories, your "you won't believe what they find me for" moments, or even the petty revenge plans you've only dared to dream, because when we tell these stories together, we don't just laugh, we fight smarter.